久しぶり。
マジか。
大マジ。
That's right. You didn't think I was going to spin back, did you? We're breaking all of the rules with this video. Negative agenda multiplied on itself is positive agenda. I've discovered it at that store. Today, we are going to be talking about Naruto and Sasuke post their nerfs in the Boruto series. If you've seen the original video, don't click off. This is going to be a completely different video. Entirely new arguments are going to be presented, and a lot of what I've said in the original video is going to get retconned. Dragon Ball Super Beerus, that shit never happened in the manga. If you're seeing this video for the first time and did not get the full context of the other video, well then congrats, you're just getting a fresh new video. Stick around for the outro and why I'm actually remaking the video, and I'll explain some of my thoughts there. Without further ado, let's get into the combo. In discussing these characters scaling, I share a lot of sentiments from the original video, that being that Boruto places Sasuke and Naruto in a similar tier post Kawaki event, with Naruto and Sasuke both being able to compete with the general tier of Borushiki and Kawashiki. For Borushiki, it's a lot more direct. He basically says that he might be wounded, but he still won't walk away unarmed if he faces a more fatigued version of Sasuke head on. Although it is important to note that this version of Borushiki is weaker than the variation that fights Code later on, or that Code compares to. This being explicitly noted, with Boruto noting that it's not like I've used up all his chakra or strength like before, with this version of Borushiki that Sasuke is comparing to being a variation that is so weakened that he doesn't even want to bother absorbing a fireball, as even that small amount of chakra would risk Boruto regaining consciousness. Naruto similarly is shown to be able to react at least to higher speeds like Ishiki's cubes. Now, while these cubes are just kind of weird in terms of speed, they are able to destroy Six Paths Naruto shadow clones, and through repeated assault are able to tag Six Paths Sasuke. So on a lower end, they should just still scale to the general tier of combatant that are using the cubes. And while the speed placement is a bit vague, the fact that they are usable and able to tag opponents of a relative speed tier does at the very least indicate they are comparable to the levels of speed that Ishiki or Kawaki, when utilizing Ishiki's power, would be fighting at. I believe Boruto's sentiment is probably the best gauge in terms of which one of these two to go off of, in that Sasuke has more, I guess you could say, confidence scaling to Borushiki, who at full power may just be stronger than full power Sasuke. I'm going to talk about this in a second, so this may not be a direct one-to-one compared to Naruto, who is more so reacting to a general speed tier from a projectile from an opponent at a higher placement. Boruto making this sentiment when Damon actually questions if there's any decent fighters here, and Boruto just witnessing Kawashiki and Sage Mode Naruto in the whole Code debacle. Now, there is a layer of this where you kind of also have to get into Code scaling, since it does relate, as you can't have Code being somebody who's touted multiple times to be stronger than Naruto, while also having somebody who is in Naruto's general tier being able to scale to Borushiki, who directly fights on par with the version of Kawaki that was dominating Code. Code scaling in Boruto does kind of suck, I'm going to be honest, and there's a couple reasons from this. You have direct statements like Amato directly stating to Kawaki that while he's unsure, he doesn't really think Naruto would be able to stand up to Code. You could just say this is a fallible statement, as Amato doesn't have knowledge on Naruto Sage Mode and is kind of just pondering, with them also pandering to Kawaki's insecurities about losing Naruto at this point in time in order to get him to absorb or take Ishiki's power. In which I think the better route for discussing Code in relation to these two is just having him be greater than Delta. This is a sentiment that Kawaki himself expresses, noting that Code is stronger than Delta and Boro as far as he knows. Although, again, this could be a fallible statement, I do think there is a pretty clear consistency in the statements being made. There are some statements that exist, such as Code being noted to possess abilities that are in the same level of Boros but surpass those of Delta's, which is more so in reference to hacks, at least in my opinion, since Delta obviously slaughters Boro in pretty much every scaling category. It is a bit of a weird situation, since Code himself mentions multiple times that he thinks he can win against Naruto and Sasuke if he were to fight them one-on-one. So I do think there is a good basis to say there's some author intent with Code just being greater than them in their nerf states. This extending over to Kawaki and Borushiki as well, as Amato notes later on. As of right now, there is no one in Konoha who can oppose Kawaki's power, including the Hokage, which does go back to the former interpretation, with both Naruto and Sasuke being below these two and this general tier, but still being relevant enough to be threatening to this tier. Or just that Borushiki was so fatigued that Sasuke was a high diff opponent for him, and at full power he would just scale over that full power version of Sasuke. Although the option does exist to actually just make knowledge claims that each character doesn't know how strong Naruto and Sasuke are, I just feel as if there is a pretty clear consistency in terms of the statements being made, to where you can also just say, well, Boruto at full power is probably just stronger than Sasuke, and that fatigued variation is more so just closer to a fatigued version of Sasuke, but it doesn't scale up 1-to-1 when the duo are at full power. It could not be the case. I think the bottom line is that Boruto's statement is the best way to gauge these two just being in a relative tier, or Sasuke would just have better interpretations. So you really just end up in the same position whether how these characters view Naruto and Sasuke alongside one another, or characters like Boruto who do have an idea of their abilities also putting them alongside one another. Post Naruto getting sealed, the best feat that Sasuke has is taking out one of Code's eyes off screen. Now, this is an off-screen encounter. We really don't know what happens. I've heard it said that Sasuke could potentially scale closer to his Rinnegan counterpart, potentially losing the Rinnegan in its chakra drain. First and foremost, I'll just say this. If you think that Sasuke cliffed his Rinnegan counterpart with just training Boruto over the course of a few years, by all means, whatever, you can have that opinion. I just don't like it, and like basing an entire tier placement off an entire off-screen encounter, there's just too much conjecture and too much unknown to really give a confident answer or use it for a scaling interpretation. I've heard it said that due to Sasuke losing his Rinnegan, which is always active, he no longer has constant chakra drain, meaning he has more chakra to allocate to his stats. I mean, it's possible, sure, I won't dismiss it entirely. I don't know if we could actually say that's the case. A lot of people point to Kakashi and how he was able to get stronger post-War Arc despite losing his Sharingan, but this actually does ignore the fact that he doesn't have the Uchiha body, which is why the Sharingan is taking up so much of his chakra and why he has to cover it. Is being noted more directly against Itachi himself. So I don't know how I feel about applying this logic directly to Sasuke and using it as justification to again say that he just cliffs his Rinnegan counterpart. It's just a pretty big leap from an off-screen encounter where you could make justifications such as Code just being off guard, along with the potential that Sasuke could be mental amped in a desire to actually protect Boruto. There are numerous ways you can justify it rather than just saying Sasuke got an entire tier stronger than a version of himself with an entire Rinnegan. That's just me. It's not a great feat to use as an end-all be-all, honestly speaking. I will also say there is a statement roaming around, which is a V-jump statement that people try to use to say Sasuke got stronger alongside Boruto. What this statement is actually referencing is Naruto and Boruto and their masters, that being Sasuke and Jiraiya, and the two getting stronger are Boruto and Naruto. They're the topic of this V-jump statement. I'll post the other side of the V-jump statement just for anybody who's curious, but if you actually take 2 seconds to look at the scan, it also is just referencing Jiraiya and Sasuke as the master and Naruto and Boruto as the students, literally in the pictures. The two in reference are not Boruto and Sasuke. Even if you read the passage, it makes way more sense when you consider that. So at a baseline, Sasuke and Naruto just have very similar scaling interpretations to where you kind of have to put them next to each other. Or Sasuke has slightly better interpretations of the Boruto encounter, although we kind of explained why that's not really the best to use. And the Code example, that being limiter removed Code, who is stronger than Jigen, which also just isn't that great to use. So I think the overall consensus is that these characters just scale in similar ranges. I know I kind of went through some hoops to discuss this. I just kind of wanted to give us all a better idea with a more complete picture into the Boruto scaling scene as a whole. But enough chit chat on this. Let's actually get into the matchup itself and what these characters are capable of. Let's start with Sasuke's general abilities and what he should be capable of. One of the biggest problems in the original video, at least in my opinion, was Sasuke not having the Susanoo. The only argument that was presented was that because Sasuke didn't use it in his on-screen fight with Code, he shouldn't have it. This is flawed because Sasuke just doesn't use it against Ishiki despite Ishiki being stronger than Jigen, meaning Sasuke likely just didn't think it was useful to go at these characters who are already stronger than the speed and power increase that the Susanoo offers, so the logic really doesn't work. Furthermore, I believe it is fair to say Sasuke does have up to the armored Susanoo. The reason I kind of cap it at the armored variation is due to how Itachi is blind during the events of his Orochimaru fight. Though I think this could be contentious, I think he's blind for 2 main reasons. The first being that he actually just notes that he senses Orochimaru's 8-headed Hydra Jutsu. The sensing point is important in and of itself because if he recognized the jutsu, he would just say, oh, this is Orochimaru's 8-headed Hydra Jutsu, but he can't see, so he has to rely on just general chakra sensing. Furthermore, Itachi's eyes are whited out, similarly to when he uses Izanami against Kabuto. The drawback of using this ocular ability is losing sight in one of your eyes, and we see that it is whited out in the same way that Itachi's is in his fight with Sasuke. It also just wouldn't be outside the scope of what we've seen, since Madara can just use the Susanoo with no eyes. Now, there are extra factors to Madara using his full body Susanoo that I think may not apply to Sasuke. However, if you did want to go under the idea that an MS user, due to how the Susanoo is presented as a technique that more so incorporates the body itself over the visual prowess, is being represented even in the lashback from using the Susanoo too much, as Sasuke notes every cell in his body hurts compared to the normal Mangekyo abilities, which have main drawbacks in the eyes themselves. Not saying the Susanoo also doesn't do that, but it definitely takes a greater toll. If you want to reverse this logic with Sasuke's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, you might actually be able to make a case that he would be able to use the upper limits of the Susanoo that he showcased in the war arc, and even potentially the perfect Susanoo which he showcased against Jubito. The way I would view Sasuke is like this, and this is probably what I would say for everybody to look at Sasuke in this discussion. The absolute floor should be the armored Susanoo, and everything beyond that is possible. We just don't have an exact metric on which variation Sasuke would use up to. Like, if we legitimately say he has the perfect Susanoo, then he body slams Naruto. If he has the full body Susanoo, then he body slams Naruto. There's not too much discussion to be had on those points, and I do think Madara is his own unique case. I don't want to get too much into this just to derail the video too much, but to encapsulate Sasuke, bare minimum, the armored variation, everything above is possible. We just don't have an exact definable metric. The point I'm trying to make with this Sasuke point, that I did it in the other video, but I do want to make clear in this section, is that it's very hard to deduce exactly what abilities he still has access to, so we kind of do have to go with the bare minimums based on other characters that have been shown. So I think the full armored Susanoo is the most consistent, along with Sasuke having access to Amaterasu and Kagutsuchi. As we see even in the Boruto anime, Sasuke can use Kagutsuchi coating his Amaterasu blade with one eye. A big point TG mentioned is that Sasuke's Amaterasu actually switches from his left eye to his right eye, with his right eye originally being what Kagutsuchi was. This being showcased in the final valley, where he actually spawns the Amaterasu out of his Kagutsuchi eye, despite his Rinnegan actually being covered and out of commission. So a similar case should be here, and I point to the Sasuke vs Urashiki fight again, because I think it would play out similarly here. What Sasuke does against Urashiki is spawn the Amaterasu next to Urashiki, who dodges it, with Sasuke actually chopping his sword through the black flames in order to coat his blade in them. So he is able to still control them and apply them to his weaponry. What this means is that at the very least we can say Sasuke is likely just closer to his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan counterpart, but actually better in a lot of other ways. But for this section, we'll just say he's able to use Kagutsuchi in the same manner he did in the war, combining it with this Susanoo to form Enton arrows, swords, or Yosaka Magatama beads. I'm going to talk about how Sasuke's Rinnegan actually affected his Sharingan, since it did affect him in a pretty significant way a bit later. For now, I want to touch on Naruto. Naruto at this point should still have an augmented base and a very large chakra pool, as he still is able to use Sage Mode, the requirement being a vast amount of chakra, although it is noted, at least by the anime standards, that he will no longer have superhuman chakra. Kurama also makes a note in the manga itself, noting that Naruto won't have superhuman strength anymore, so overall he got weaker, pretty self-explanatory, but is capable of using Sage Mode to even a much higher degree than he did in the original series. Naruto chalks this up to wisdom of age, being able to use his Sage Mode for far longer, compared to the 5-minute timer that he was limited to in the Pain arc. It also is worth noting that in the manga, Naruto is able to use 3 Rasen Shuriken compared to his 2 Rasen Shuriken limit in the manga, meaning his Sage Mode timer should have gone up in the war arc to 7.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes for each Rasen Shuriken, as 2 of them drain his entire Sage Mode chakra pool, reverting him back to base. Naruto being able to perform 3 in the war arc brings him up to 7.5 minutes, and him saying he's able to use it quite a bit longer than he was before does lead me to say he would be at the very least able to use it for 10 minutes. The anime of Naruto vs the 10 Tails also shows Naruto throwing 4 Rasen Shuriken, so even by anime standards, this isn't really that crazy of an assumption for a composite Naruto, but going off manga only, I think 10 minutes is pretty fair. At least going off Naruto saying he's able to use it way longer than before in reference to his 7.5 minute timer in the war arc. I also think it's worth mentioning that Naruto would just be able to replicate everything he does in the war arc, that being one-handed Rasengans, giant Rasen Shurikens that rival the Odama Rasen Shuriken, likely from Naruto expanding the size by pouring nature energy into the Rasen Shuriken. Similar to the Pain arc, Naruto would also be able to gather nature energy at a far faster rate, as we see in the War arc, where he can instantly enter Sage Mode either by just sitting down to sense the Ten Tails, or even by just standing still in the midst of Obito's speech. Some people point to Naruto losing Kurama as actually making his Sage Mode weaker, but that's not really how it works. Naruto's Sage Mode blends his base chakra with nature energy to fuse and result in a new chakra. So while Naruto's overall chakra quantity has gone down, his Sage Mode chakra quantity, which is directly tied to his base chakra, hasn't. It's a similar case with Naruto collecting nature energy in the war while in Biju mode. Yes, he's able to do it faster, but it's not as if his Sage Mode is actually getting stacked or mixed in with the Nine Tails chakra, it's just his base chakra. We know there are distinct differences between when the Nine Tails is collecting nature energy and when Naruto is, as when the Nine Tails does it, or it's collected with a Nine Tails amount of chakra, it's something akin to a 10 Tails amp, as we see in the war. This is more of a general outline of these two characters' abilities. How do they actually interact and what happens when they fight? Now, in terms of close quarters combat, I've actually shifted on the opinion that Naruto's Frog Kata actually gives him a W in close quarters combat. Here's my rationale for it. What TG failed to visualize and had to sit on in the hyperbolic time chamber is how Sasuke's Sharingan is 6 pats boosted now, so even with the loss of his Rinnegan, his Sharingan, even in its base state, is just a 6 pats boosted variation. I've talked about this in other videos, but Sasuke awakening the Rinnegan and getting the 6 pats buffs essentially buffed his Sharingan to the point to where he was just able to replicate his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan perception feats with just the 3 Tomoe Sharingan. As we just see Sasuke in his final fight with Naruto just uses the 3 Tomoe Sharingan and only switches to his EMS when he's actually utilizing Kagetsuchi, this being the case in the Kaguya fight as well, with it also being noted in Boruto as a whole that when Sasuke and Naruto are going full power, that being the perfect Susanoo and Kurama avatar, Sasuke is still using the base 3 Tomoe Sharingan. It's basically a super boosted Sharingan off of Sasuke awakening the Rinnegans and achieving 6 pats power. Despite losing the Rinnegan, his Sharingan should still be boosted to the same extent, as he still uses it in a similar way and doesn't change to his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan in Boruto as a whole. What this means is that despite losing the Rinnegan, Sasuke should still retain the kinetic vision feats that his Sharingan offers. This is relevant since it's actually noted that Sasuke's Sharingan was able to barely track Ishiki's expanding rods. It also being cited that Sasuke's kinetic vision, that being his 6 pats amped Sharingan, was also enabling him to see Ishiki growing and shrinking in the fight against him in another time space, whereas Naruto wasn't really able to sense it. That doesn't mean that Naruto just isn't able to fight at that same caliber. More so, Naruto's sensory abilities were just getting countered here, and Sasuke's kinetic vision, which works off physical movement, was much better for just seeing an object grow and shrink. However, what this means is that despite losing the Rinnegan, Sasuke should still retain this kinetic vision or something close to it. Obviously, if you don't want to say his perception's exactly the same, that's fine. It just is important to note that Jigen directly credits Sasuke's kinetic vision with his Sharingan and his Rinnegan based jutsu separately. So I believe his 6 pads boosted Sharingan is doing most of the heavy lifting here, which does mean he should be able to perform and see Naruto's movements in a close quarters encounter far better. Due to this higher level of perception, I believe Sasuke would just outperform Naruto in a similar manner to the War arc where Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke is eventually able to tag Madara, who credits his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and the straight pattern it has for Sasuke being able to land the counter blow, whereas Naruto, even with his threat perception in Sage Mode, doesn't really perform that well. Obviously, there's scaling differences here, but the main point being that Sasuke's kinetic vision should still scale closer to the levels that were present in the Ishiki and Jigen encounters compared to Naruto, who lost all of that and is now relying on a far inferior form of threat perception in Sage Mode compared to the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and what it is able to visualize. It's basically a 6 pads boosted EMS turned into a 3 Tomoe Sharingan compared to a regular Sage Mode, which has been improved but still doesn't even compare or hold up well compared to the baseline EMS, let alone the 6 pads boosted kinetic vision that the Sharingan now has. This more so being relevant since there's a much higher precedent now for Sasuke actually able to just tag Naruto with his Kenjutsu, and even if Naruto is able to disarm Sasuke or anything to that extent, Sasuke really just has to tag him with one Inferno style attack in order to actually take Naruto down. TG talked about this in the original video, but Amaterasu itself isn't a great win con, and I think he was right on that. that, since we just do see Momoshiki is able to react to it with a shadow clone, going off the idea that Naruto and Sasuke do scale to similar levels, Naruto with his enhanced threat perception should be able to pull off a similar maneuver to Momoshiki, as he'll have much more time in advance to actually prep the shadow clone compared to Momoshiki, who's just doing it off of a reactionary feat. So it would just be a similar case with Naruto and Sasuke, with Naruto just having added bonus. Inferno style itself is a much safer win con, especially with Sasuke just being present inside his Susanoo and utilizing it on a much larger scale. It will just make it that much harder for Naruto. Even assuming Naruto could damage the Susanoo with his Rasen Shuriken due to similar scaling interpretations for both of the characters, regular Rasen Shurikens, which should take up a good chunk of Naruto's Sage Mode time limit, are just shown to be on par or directly relative to the Amaterasu in the War Arc, with Sasuke's Enton Arrow being directly shown to counter Odama Rasen Shuriken, which Naruto can't actually create. We see that when the jutsu are announced, that even in the Japanese, Naruto's Rasen Shuriken on top of the God Tree when he's in Sage Mode is just a Rasen Shuriken, whereas when he throws it in QB Chakra mode, it's cited as an Odama Rasen Shuriken. Naruto just replicates it, likely by just pumping it full of nature energy, which again, he does during the Pain Arc. So in similar scaling ranges, Sasuke's Enton Arrow usually scales to a higher degree of Rasen Shuriken. Granted, Naruto should be able to replicate it, but this is not something, in my opinion, he would be able to do on repeat without expending his Sage Mode time limit. At best, they cancel out. At worst, Sasuke would just win the encounter. Do I think Naruto's Frog Kata would be extremely effective against Sasuke? Yes, especially with Naruto being able to counter blow and extend the range of the attacks with rising power, similar to how he does against the Preta Path of Pain, this being something Sasuke would not be able to see with his Sharingan. However, even Naruto getting close to perform any sort of Frog Kata on Sasuke does put him in Inferno style Kenjutsu range, especially if Sasuke just utilizes Enton as a sword itself like he does in the War Arc. Then it's going to be very difficult for Naruto to get in close and actually get that successful strike on him. I will say, however, in reference to the Susanoo itself, I believe Naruto's Frog Strike, which is a technique that is an inside destruction taijutsu that emits chakra like a wave, would at the very least be useful against attacking Sasuke inside the Susanoo, or at the very least shifting his focus and disrupting his movements. Like Naruto slaps the Susanoo with Frog Strikes and Sasuke maybe falls over from the wave of chakra. That before even going as far as to say it's effective also against the enemies who have a strong defense. So I think in this instance it would be very effective. However, then you have Naruto running up and trying to box with Sasuke's Susanoo, which is either just coded in Enton or controlling large amounts of Enton on the entire battlefield. This all in all wouldn't be as problematic if Sasuke's kinetic vision wasn't so high with his Sharingan that he wouldn't just be able to perceive Naruto's movements in a much easier fashion. As like we established, his Sharingan should scale to a higher speed grade, or actually the peak of what Naruto has achieved beyond this Sage Mode form, to where slowing down Sage Mode Naruto's movements and planting one Enton strike so that he can win even with Naruto's danger sense isn't quite as tall of an order compared to Naruto, who is a bit more lacking despite having great danger sense. Isn't anything near what Sasuke's Sharingan should scale closer to, that being Naruto's absolute peak in Baryon mode and those high speed rods that Sasuke barely but can still track, meaning there's no real argument for any of Naruto's movements aside for maybe clone feints really catching Sasuke by surprise, as he'll be able to slow down everything and perceive anything at a much higher degree and make the appropriate counter strikes like we saw against Madara. The higher grade of the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan at least offensively should give Sasuke a better chance to just hit Naruto with some amount of Enton. Even if he is at a taijutsu disadvantage, he can fall back on his Kenjutsu and Amaterasu swords themselves, or just stack the Susanoo and just jump at Naruto in a similar place to land a similar counter-strike. It sounds like Naruto's in a pretty bad position. The best win con I would say for Naruto, if I was going to make a pro Naruto argument, is that he does something akin to what he does against Kurama, where he actually launches 27 Odama Rasengan in an attempt to overpower and break through Sasuke's Susanoo itself. Although, again, I would actually make the case that Naruto's Rasen Shuriken would be more effective in this regard, as Kurama, who is visibly getting blown back and effective, isn't nearly as damaged compared to the Rasen Shuriken that was chucked at him. Now, there are some jutsu differences here, but right after Kurama is blown back by the Odama Rasengan barrage, that being 27 Odama Rasengan, he's also hit by a Rasen Shuriken, which causes him to say, what kind of power is this, in response to the Rasen Shuriken and not the Odama barrage that he was just hit by. It's also being presented via feats, as Kurama also just takes external damage from the Rasen Shuriken earlier in the fight and has no issues just tail swiping away one singular Odama Rasengan. meaning that the Rasen Shuriken actually should still scale above 27 Odama Rasengan. As crazy as that sounds, the jutsu is just that insane. This makes more sense when you consider that Naruto wasn't taking in so much nature energy in his fight with Kurama that he turned into a toad, meaning this should still be achievable in one burst of Sage Mode, that the Rasen Shuriken consumes more Sage energy, as we actually see Naruto is in Sage Mode post Rasen Shuriken and Odama Rasengan Barrage, meaning that the Odama Rasengan Barrage likely didn't even consume as much chakra as one Rasen Shuriken. Rasen Shuriken is just greater on all accounts, and this is just presented time and time again via feats in the series. This is all to say Naruto may actually just be unable to damage the Susanoo to the severity he wants with this many clones, and would likely need to resort to the Rasen Shuriken, which does get into what I mentioned earlier with Sasuke dealing with that with his own Enton variations. We just don't have a good gauge on how many clones it would actually take with Odama Rasengan to actually break through the Susanoo itself. The more defendable stance, in my opinion, is to just say with Rasen Shuriken, Naruto can damage it. Although, again, going back to the beginning of the video, if you give Sasuke any form beyond the armored Susanoo, this no longer becomes a discussion and becomes a slaughter. We're already kind of teetering on the line, especially since this is closer to Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke versus Sage Mode Naruto, but it is important to cite a lot of differences in how Naruto would deal with the Susanoo as a whole. I didn't touch on Genjutsu too much, but that's partially due to the fact that Naruto can fight with his eyes closed in Sage Mode, meaning that Sasuke would either have to capitalize on a momentary glance by Naruto, or Naruto would just fight with his eyes closed while using Danger Sense to dodge all of Sasuke's attacks, or just not look at his eyes. I think Naruto's enhanced physicals in Sage Mode would make this possible, especially since we see him able to just hop over Kurama's tails, or just hop over great distances due to his enhanced physicals. He would be in a good position to maneuver around the battlefield. Also, weirdly enough, if you wanted to give this to like a composite adult Naruto, he does still have his summons and should be able to summon Ma and Pa, who would merge with him now that Kurama is no longer a part of him, which would operate as two foreign chakra sources that would just operate as means to jolt Naruto out of Genjutsu. There are more points to talk about, especially with Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke's Genjutsu, along with the fact that Naruto, while in base, is just going to be super susceptible to it, as we see that Sasuke's Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Genjutsu is actually on par with Itachi Tsukuyomi in the Kabuto fight, with it being noted in Sasuke Jinraiden, as I've said in other videos, that Sasuke does show space-time control with his Mangekyo Genjutsu. Tsukuyomi, the direct thing it's being compared to or at a caliber of, is showcased to be effective even on perfect Jinchuriki, hence you could say why it would be effective on this version of Naruto, or if Naruto gets hit, it may be a situation of Sasuke can operate in a similar fashion to Tsukuyomi and take Naruto down before Ma and Pa, or a shadow clone that's charged up with Sage Chakra being popped would just take too long, whereas Sasuke, who can manipulate these factors and does have a higher grade of Genjutsu, would be able to take Naruto down in the time frame before that happens. I don't see this as a super likely scenario, I just figured I would address it as it is possible like anything in a lot of these shonen battles. All in all, it doesn't really look as good for Naruto on this side. It's pretty much Sage Mode Naruto versus Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke. I think the argument that really seals the deal is just Sasuke's 6 paths amped Sharingan and what he's able to perceive with it, along with the fact that at the lowest common denominator, you have Sasuke, who has the peak version of his Susanoo from the 5 Kage Summit, yet stronger, and at the best interpretation, has some higher stage. Last point I could see somebody make is that Sasuke may have some Rinnegan abilities in base due to Madara just using Prey to Path absorption without eyes. I've heard it said he may have a different chakra absorption technique like Yoroi in the Chunin exams, completely separate from the Prey to Path itself. I don't really think that's implied at all. Naruto just says that Madara can absorb ninjutsu. Before he absorbs ninjutsu, the only ninjutsu absorption Naruto has seen has been the Prey to Path, so I think it follows that Madara is using the Prey to Path. But if you think he has an unnamed Shadow and Light style technique that he never taught Obito that allows him to absorb a Madarasu level jutsu, despite Obito never showcasing that level of absorption, despite him being taught every Shadow and Light style technique by Madara, by all means, I'm going to stay over here. And with Madara using the Rinnegan, I do think that's kind of a Madara point only, as it's described on the back of Data Book 3 when confronted with the idea that the One Tail has been extracted from Gaara. Is he unable to control the sand? And Kishimoto responds, as this is a Q&A with Kishimoto, that once a technique is ingrained to you, you can't take it away, not even the sand itself. So while this could apply to other abilities, I think it's very select, as for example, it's not like Madara can use Limbo without his Rinnegan. It's just determining exactly what's been ingrained to him is impossible to say, but that wiggle room and us having more interpretations to go with for what Sasuke can do and higher ceilings is what gives him a bit of an edge over Naruto. That being, he has a stronger variation of himself compared to Sage Mode Naruto, and that variation of himself has those techniques ingrained to him that give him more wiggle room in this discussion. It kind of all comes together, but this is kind of why I say what techniques are ingrained in the user can be variable, and the bare minimums, that being the Susanoo and the potential stages it has, are what we should use. So despite the similar scaling tiers, I do see Sasuke taking it more often than not only due to the fact that even though the two do generally scale in a similar sense, I think Sasuke just has a, maybe there's some more interpretations there, but also from an ability aspect, I think Sasuke is just closer to his Eternal Magikyo Sharingan counterpart and does have some added benefits compared to Naruto, who has to go with a completely different power-up compared to Sasuke, who can still utilize the power-ups garnered over Shippuden. He could basically still use part of the skill tree that he had been working on throughout the entirety of the series, compared to Naruto, who has to now go back to an entirely different skill tree than Kurama's power and the 6-path Sage Mode that he had been using up until this point. That's the video. Let me know if you guys agree, disagree, why. Like the video, subscribe if you like anything you heard. Let me know your thoughts down below. As far as anybody who saw the original video and is now watching this one, the video I had actually previously put up was doing really well compared to other videos on the channel. It was actually at a 1 out of 10 on YouTube standards, which means it is better than my last 10 uploads. But personally, I didn't really feel like the video held up to the standard that the channel has come to in the videos that I make. I just didn't really like it. I didn't like the arguments. I sat on it, and I did not want that to be an accurate representation of my current opinions. Most people really just don't do this, that being remaking videos so soon after you publish them, but it didn't sit right with me, and I kind of wanted to rectify it ASAP, especially with it being so fresh in everybody's minds. AKA, that shit had to get run back. I already said like and subscribe, so I'm just gonna get out of here. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.